We are beautifully, melanated.
Welcome to the Beautifully Melanated podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I'm here tonight with my co-host.
Hi, I'm Kay. Just wanted to apologize for Karen. She will be joining us later. She is on mommy duty at the moment. You know how it goes. It's life. We have a really special guest tonight. I did say last week we had a little treat for you, and Sarah will introduce our guest later on. So, Sarah, I'm going to go straight into what's in the world, if that's okay.
Sure.
So this week, what caught my eye? Well, it caught my eye last week, but I wasn't ready to talk about it. And it was the Panorama investigation into the Edenfield Centre in Greater Manchester. It's a NHS mental health inpatient unit. And what they found over 3 months was the following: staff swearing at patients, taunting and mocking them in vulnerable situations, such as when they were undressing, and making jokes about their self-harm. Patients being unnecessarily restrained, according to experts who reviewed the footage, as well as being slapped or pinched by staff on some occasions. Some female staff acting in a sexualized way towards male patients. 10 patients being held in a small seclusion room, which is designed for short-term isolation to prevent immediate harm, but they were left there for weeks, even months, with only brief breaks. And patient observations, a crucial safety measure, was regularly missed, and records have been falsified. And basically, the consultant psychiatrist looking at the footage has said it showed a toxic culture among the staff of corruption, perversion, aggression, hostility, and a lack of boundaries, which was undermining patient recovery. I'm not going to read the whole article, but I'm going to quote something to give a flavor of how toxic and abusive this was. One patient who has a history of self-harm was filmed being humiliated by a female support worker for needing help with going to the toilet. The staff member complained to her face about, quote, having to look at your arsehole where biohazard fucking waste comes out, end quote. Yeah, that really, I cannot yet watch the Panorama investigation. It's deeply distressing for me as a practitioner to hear that people at their most vulnerable, they're inpatient for a reason. To be treated like that is quite grotesque. So I'm going to open up to you, Sarah, and our guest, Amit. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm just going to jump in quickly and then obviously invite Amit if he wants to speak, and then we'll introduce our guest, Amit. I haven't much to say about it. I haven't watched the Panorama yet. All I have to say about it is I think it's disgusting. I think it's disrespectful. I think these people are inhumane. And what worries me, Kay, is what you're describing here makes me think this has been going on for a long time in this particular establishment. I also question, these people are meant to be in a position of care. So what you're saying about that woman and her disgusting thoughts on that person that needed help to use the toilet. I'm just thinking, why would they even, if they're meant to be there to care for people, why even go into that career? Why even do that if you're such a horrible, toxic person yourself? The only biohazard I can hear about is what crap comes out of her mouth. So, I just think people are most vulnerable in an inpatient unit. And I just think it's disgusting, absolutely disgusting that they were treated like that and humiliated. And I think the people that did that to them, I think they all need therapy, because there's some kind of power games going on here
Yeah.
some kind of sadomasochistic shit. But that's all I'll say about it. Otherwise, I'll do a whole rant on it.
I was wondering about recruitment as well. Who are these people? But
Exactly.
believe
Who
it
are
or
these
not,
people?
a
Yeah.
senior nurse was among those who watched and laughed and jeered as this patient was slapped.
Well, to me, that sounds like some kind of sick. It could also be fetishized, even almost, couldn't it? You piece of shit. It could go to that, couldn't it? Literally.
Yeah.
I mean, horrible,
Yeah.
Kay. So I think terrible.
Amit, before you join us, I'm going to read a little section that I think might. So this is your area of specialism, okay? So another inpatient said staff had called her a fat cunt before claiming they were joking. In the past, she had stopped eating and drinking because she believed she was overweight. So over to you, Amit.
Right. The first thing, is that it makes me deeply sad to hear what you just read out. As someone who works in an NHS unit that has an inpatient department, and I feel that personally when I hear stuff like that going on. I feel deeply saddened just because it really touches me being in that kind of environment, looking after people who are very, very ill. But it also makes me wonder, how did it get like that? Because I think you were saying that it must have been going on for a long time. And I think that's right. I think that these things are like, that was the bottom of a slippery slope. And it must have started very small. It must have started with small infractions or small lapses, or staff being overwhelmed, or not having enough resources, and then moving into a culture where corners get cut, and then gradually things just get worse and worse and worse, and then you have the level of depravity which it is disgusting, and it's saddening, and it's it's disgraceful, and we want to condemn it. But I also want to know how did it get like that, and was anyone trying to stop it, or even were there one or two good people who were powerless against what was going on? I'd love to know the inside track on it.
I suppose it would help if I were to watch the entire documentary, but there was a shortage of staff. Absolutely, that's one of the key things that came up in the article. There's a shortage of staff. They had recruitment problems in mental health. But that doesn't excuse the abuse. That's a whole other level. I mean, you can be understaffed and still deliver care where you're not humiliating and shaming and abusing patients. So you're right. I do wonder, at some point, did everybody just think, let's join in? Can't beat them, join them.
And I've been in my career in a therapist in a high supported mental health unit where we were looking after patients in supported living. And part of my role was to reflect with the staff on some of their values and some of the way that, they might have been approaching the patients. And of course, there was never anything like, abuse or anything going on. But sometimes people are underpaid, people are tired, people are worn out, people cut corners, people just get fed up with their jobs, and they stop caring, even though they're in a profession of care. And it was always my job to make sure that never caught hold, or that was kind of identified and worked through.
Right.
But you're right, even with those kind of problems, there's a big chasm that gets crossed. When you move from being overworked and, cutting corners, there's a big leap that must be made into abuse or humiliation or, actively taking out your frustrations on the people that you're supposed to be looking after. And once to, the darkness, it's really hard to come back from that.
Mm. So, as you've spoken, I've just thought then, so there had to be a level of dehumanization taking place to allow one to relate to another in this way. And as a microcosm maybe of wider society, where there seems to be huge amounts of anxiety and lack and fear of what's going to happen to me, it's easy to project that onto the most vulnerable in society, who tends to carry our anxieties and frustrations and shame and so forth, so on.
I think
there had to be a dehumanization.
There's a lot of mileage in that, absolutely, and that there's a lot of projection that goes on onto these people, and by that I mean stuff that the staff are trying to deal with, that suddenly gets placed onto the other. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. In the supported living place I was working at, people were low paid, people were overworked, not getting holidays, working horrendous shifts, like 12-hour shifts. And then looking at the patients thinking, these guys got an easy life. They don't have to struggle with rent. They don't have to struggle with mortgages. Like, they're in their rooms watching TV all day. They're not going to jobs. And that's what I mean by projection. The stuff that's out there in society that we're all feeling, there's a target, there's a ready-made target. And once that projection takes hold, that leads to the dehumanization, because it's just a leap from projection of the bad onto them. Well, then you can start dehumanizing them because they're bad anyway, or they're greedy, or they're like whatever.
This makes so much sense to me, because when you're talking, Amit, I'm actually thinking about places I've seen things like this. Nothing to the extremity of what Kay's saying, but I know in schools, even schools I've worked in, secondary schools as a counsellor, and my friend also, who's a police officer, she sees it where they'll have a crime scene and the police will laugh about who's got the most, whose murder's the worst or something. They'll laugh because they have no supervision. I found out none, apart from with somebody within that's a police officer themselves, which is not appropriate. And so they will kind of laugh at a body that may be dead. And I myself have seen, when working in the schools, staff becoming kind of laughing at young people's mental ill health, nicknaming them, laughing at them. People that are suicidal will be laughed at. People that are self-harming will just be told, well, here, she's doing it again then. It's normal for her. So where it's not as extreme as what Kay's saying, I can see how tired, overworked, underpaid people can become like this. So I can see exactly what you're saying, Amit. It can become a monster. And like you said, it started off somewhere. I think everyone started off, I'd hope, well-meaning. And then it just became, sadly, what it became at this place. And it is other places as well. So, yeah, very sad.
It is. And it disheartens me. We are doing the series on mental health. And we talked previously about the barriers to men, particularly accessing mental health support. But I can imagine, too, that then if this is your option, you're either under-medicated, over-medicated, as the article did point out as well. that perhaps that is a barrier for some people, saying, I need help, because that's the standard of care. How can that be any worse than what they are currently feeling?
Exactly.
Food for thought. Let us know your thoughts, listeners, but we are going to move on to tonight's topic. So, Sarah, over to you to introduce our guest.
Yes. So you've just heard there the gentleman speaking. That is Amit. So we're very, very blessed to have Amit with us tonight. We have searched long and hard to find a man to talk about male mental health. Amit is a psychodynamic psychotherapist, and he works in both private practice and frontline care services. He's especially interested in health and wellness, and the science around well-being and human optimism. Amit is also the author of a book that's been published last year, and that book is regarding mindfulness, and it's in relation to food and the body. So we have Amit on the podcast tonight to discuss the lack of male therapists in the industry, and male clients, and together with lots of stats regarding male mental health. So we wanted a professional view on this. So yeah, we've asked Amit to come along. So thank you, Amit. If there's anything else you want to add to your introduction, please feel free to go ahead.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I work in frontline eating disorder services, but I've also, as I mentioned in response to the other question, worked in high support mental health, done some trauma support, and just general work in private practice. So I've been around the block in terms of different types of mental health environments, I guess. My book is Meditation for Weight Loss, which I wanted to write something that was an anti-diet book and focused more on a holistic approach to food and relationships with the body, because I see a lot of self-harm just in our approach to our bodies and the pressure to look a certain way. So I wanted
Oh, we lost Amit.
There we go. I'm back, I think.
Back again.
Lovely. Welcome back.
So yeah, very excited to be here, and to answer, or try to answer, or at least think about with you guys about men and mental health.
Yes, big field for us. We when myself and Kay and Karen were speaking, we were all saying if it came to asking a woman to come on here on a podcast and talk about their journey with mental health, it'd be so easy. It'd be so easy. I think not only could we speak about our journeys, but we'd have a list of people that'd be like, yep, no problem.
Absolutely.
No problem. But finding a man, and we are still on the lookout for a man that has had, therapy, etc. It's so hard. So hard. And we've come close to talking to men about it, and they'll come on, but no, they won't. So if it's okay just to dive in straight away, Amit, and ask you, from my point of view, what is that about? Why do you think men would start talking to maybe myself, Kay and Karen, but they're too worried, scared, I'm not quite sure, to come here and talk on the podcast? What's that about?
Well, I think in a word, it's about vulnerability. And when you talk about mental health and your struggles, I think women are very comfortable in sharing their vulnerabilities with each other, with society. Whereas there's so much in the male ego that's wrapped up in being competent, being seen as competent, and exposing anything to do with your mental health or to do with your emotional life or any kind of struggle feels like to most men, exposing yourself as being incompetent or not being able to hack it. And I recall particularly my struggle when I used to go into the prison service to deliver what was mandated mental health support for all the staff, which was put on by the prison service. And, you know, I would go in and set up my little shop, so to speak, and just say, you know, all the staff will be made aware. There's someone here if you just need to talk in confidence. And all the tough prison officers would nudge each other, but no one would be the first to go and talk, you know, to this guy, because it might signal to your colleagues that you were not hacking it.
Wow, not hacking it as in you're not hacking life, or that you're not supposed to have difficulty?
Well, a bit of both, I think, Kay, that you're not cutting it in this case, in the prison service. So any struggle, any sign of weakness might be, you know, construed by colleagues or others as not being up to the job anymore. And, you know, at one time I went in there after there'd been a huge riot, and inmates and, you know, had got loose on a wing and were fighting with staff, and several staff were, you know, injured, long-term sick. So if there ever was an excuse to want to talk to someone, I think that was it. But it was still really, really difficult to get, you know, people, men, to just talk about that experience. But when they did, boy, did the floodgates open, because everything that was held in, you know, it wasn't just that experience, it was all of the stuff that they'd been carrying, you know, from their decade plus time in service. So whereas I think on the female side of things, there are lots of little releases that happen more often. Whereas with men, it's usually always held in.
Thanks, Amit. I have a question about the messages that men receive, that they can't be vulnerable, that it makes them weak, less than, so forth, so on. That's got to be coming from a lot younger than adulthood. At what age would you say you became aware of that stereotype?
I think maybe in primary school.
Wow.
The first time you got hurt,
right?
You fell over, or you know, somebody did something, and you showed vulnerability, and someone else used that as an opportunity to exploit that weakness. And I think boys learn pretty quickly that you don't give that away again. Otherwise, it will be exploited. Your tears won't be met with kindness. It will, you know, that wound will be picked at.
And that's kindness from your peers, right? Not the adults, from your peers. Okay.
From your peers, I think so. But it could be from adults. I think I've heard stories from male clients over the years who relate how adults related to their showing of weakness. And a client of mine, I think one of my first clients when I was training, told me a story about having his new shiny bike stolen, and crying about it to his stepdad, and the stepdad sort of went round, found the boy, threatened the boy, got the bike back, whatever. But then the lesson, he turned on his stepson and said, if you let that happen again, I'm going to give you what for. Don't let anyone do that to you again. And it's a very tough world that men have grown up in that, the strong pick on the weak. And if you share your feelings about that, then they will pick on you even more.
So it goes before the boys get to school, really. In the home, that's already been passed on. You don't cry, you don't let anyone steal from you as if it's your fault. Somebody wanted to steal your bike, and interestingly, immediately I heard almost the aggression in that response, not just to I'll give you what for, but in how he handled the stolen bike. We go around there, we'll we'll get it back, and don't you dare let that happen again. So immediately the message is, it's okay to be aggressive and angry. Absolutely not okay to cry.
Yeah, that's right.
We have a problem, Sarah.
We have, it's true. Just thinking when Amit was talking, I was thinking about guys that join the forces. I'm actually reading an audiobook at the moment, a book about a guy that's joined the SAS. Anthony, what's it called? Whatever he's called, famous guy. And he was talking a lot about the kind of camaraderie and what's expected in there. And when you were talking, Amit, and when you were talking, Kay, it was about a little boy, and the bike and stuff. That's what the grown men are like now, isn't it? That join the forces, and all that stuff you guys are talking about is reinforced within the forces. I mean, and I know there's kind of a place for that, because obviously they wouldn't maybe want a soldier crying in war, but to me, it's talking about those little boys that you talked about then just becoming men, but not really growing up, and it's reinforced within our culture and our society. And it is worrying, because if it's starting from primary age, I mean, it's so difficult, isn't it, for young boys? Because, I mean, there's not many little boys that are going to want to go to, say, secondary school and cry. That's just not going to go down well. Even if, you bring up your son to be sensitive and emotional, and it's not going to be okay at school. It will never be okay, sadly, which is actually really worrying. Whereas if a girl was to cry, no problem. Everyone will rally around her and support her. Wow. Yeah. I mean, Amit, what's it when you work with, say, young men? Do you do much work with young men in the early 20s, say?
I do in private practice. Most clients in the world of eating disorders are female. I have done a lot of work with young men in different environments, as I mentioned, going into the prison service and dealing with trauma support for police officers and first responders. So at the moment, I meet less men in my working days.
I mean,
what's your question?
Are they? Sorry to cut you. How are they when do you find with men, when you have a client that's a man, do you find it's hard? They find it harder to open up to you initially, rather than a girl or a woman?
I think fewer men make it in to see a mental health professional, and I'm sure you've got the statistics that back that up. But from memory, I think it's twice as many women as men, roughly, that actually enter mental health services. So it takes a certain kind of man to even be sat across from me in the first place. I find that once they've got that far, there's a good chance that they are going to open up, because it's the ones that will never make it to an NHS service or to a private therapist. You know, they're the ones who are never going to open up to anybody. And I wanted to sort of bring into the discussion not only, you know, opening up, but there's an assumption that somebody can open up. And in order to open up, there needs to be a reasonable amount of speaking the language of your emotions, or at least being able to understand your emotions. And I think going back to, you know, boys and young boys, we're not really taught to understand our emotions and the range of them. And I often think to myself, men get to express about 3 things, you know: anger, that, you know, that kind of joy, like when someone scores a goal, that, yeah, get in. Or just, you know, maybe kind of, oh, I love, you know, I love my dog, I love my son, but in a very kind of, you know, matter of fact way. But the full range of emotions, you know, if you were to sort of look up, you know, what different emotion, how many different emotions you could find in a thesaurus or something, or try to list them, you know, most men, I think, don't even have those capacities developed to know what they are. So why would you go and try to talk to somebody about them or open up about them if you can't access them yourself?
Yeah. And I'm a huge football fan, been to many football games in stadiums. Men cry.
Right. That's the only time when it's acceptable. And, you know, when your child is born, that's
So true.
Yeah. Oh, when your child is born, you're allowed?
Yeah.
Right. And how about funerals?
It depends who it is.
Wow. So there's a lot of implied messages there to men. I know that the one they will get around the death is be strong. Be strong for your mom, be strong for your wife, be strong for your sister, but never be vulnerable.
Right.
You know, you're a pallbearer, you're a man, carry the coffin of your best friend and don't feel anything.
Right.
You know, so even at death, they're still not even allowed the range. It's got to be contained and situation specific.
Yes.
Right. That's confusing.
Absolutely.
That is very confusing. And a young man in adolescence, say, and Sarah works with more adolescent males than I do, I work with very few, will go through puberty in the same way a girl will. Body changes, hormone changes, confusion, the irrationality that comes with being a teenager when you're overwhelmed. But girls can express it all, and boys are to do what? Is that when the sexualization comes in? I don't know. I'm wondering. So the girls can have their emotions, they're on their period, you can cry, you can blah, 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 and it's all accepted. But for boys with the same physiological changes, they can't cry then. What do they do?
It's all externalized. It's all in, you know, the group activities, whether it's sport or whether it's being, you know, in the gang, in your, you know, whether it's in the street or at your sports club or just hanging out with your mates. You know, you're going and doing something.
But that something isn't crying or being vulnerable.
No.
All right.
So there's another dimension that I think comes into play here, which is what I would call the burden of competence.
Mm-hmm.
And that usually falls on men. And I would explain it like this. So let's say, um, husband and his partner, they're driving somewhere on the motorway. Maybe you've gone on holiday, or you're driving in a different part of the country, and you're, miles away from anywhere that and the car breaks down, and you have no idea what's gone wrong. The car just kind of stops, and that's a problem.
Right.
And there are different emotions that are going to come up. You'd be sad, you'd be stressed, upset, angry, that this has happened. You're like really frustrated, maybe confused about what to do next or who to call, maybe worried because it's getting dark, or you got to get somewhere. But if a man sat down and sort of, at the moment that the car broke down, sought to understand and express all of those emotions, his girlfriend or wife would just be looking at him and being like, what are you doing? There's expectation. You need to get out there and fix this thing.
Look under the hood
and that's
and know
what I call
exactly
the burden
what's
of
wrong.
competence. And in a sense, that burden of competence applies to so many endeavors in the male field, in that, I think you mentioned soldiers. Yeah, you just seen your buddy get shot. And if you just were to sort of wail and lament in grief, well, you might get shot then too. Mm. So the burden of competence demands that you put your emotions aside. And that's what men are taught to do. And that's why it goes on, because the emotions get in the way of problem solving, and men are wired to solve problems. And to a certain extent, we're expected to solve problems. But once that problem is solved, the emotions still need to be dealt with. And that side of things has never really kind of been taught to men. Once we've solved the problem, once we've won the war, once you've got the tow truck organized, move on to the next thing.
Very interesting. Amit, when you're talking about problem solving, I know my partner, if I try and help him with something, he just won't. He said, I said, why won't you let me help you? Something very boring problem. Why won't you let me help you with this? I could help you. Literally, you're so busy. Please let me help. He's like, oh, okay. He's like, no, I'll just do that. So I said, but why? Why won't you let me help you? He said, because I just feel that I should do this. I feel I should sort this. Then I can come and tell you I've sorted it. So maybe that's just what you said, Amit.
Yeah, that's him expressing the burden of competence, so that he can then feel, I've sorted it.
Right.
I put this right. I've expressed my masculinity, and I've kept you safe, or I fixed. Said, yeah, I fixed the thing. And so there's a certain amount of pride, there's a certain amount of ego, but then there's also a certain amount of, that's what we need to do. Because being competent at something is how a man survives. Like, we all need a skill or a trade or an ability to fend for ourselves in the world. And it's a very deep need, because we cannot have value just from ourselves, from our bodies, just from the ability to have children. And I'm not saying that that's all that a woman's value is, but that a woman always has that value, whereas a man has to prove his competence. Otherwise, he's a loser. He's a bum. He's nothing. He's, and he will be judged accordingly.
Wow. So the identity is literally tied up in those unspoken agreements from how many centuries ago that men will do this thing.
Yeah.
And women will do that thing, where women have evolved and have said, well, actually, we can do that too. We can be the neuroscientists and the pilots and the engineers, and we can go to war.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. And more power to you. More power
Right.
to that. Brilliant.
So what's happening with men?
Men haven't been able to go the other way and say, well, that's great. So, honey, if you want to be the neuroscientist, I'll have the children. So that it's, men still need to cling on to that, even though women are also in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I notice amongst young people that a young man who shows his emotions, which isn't rage, is called gay or a simp. They're mocked because why are you in love? You're supposed to, I don't know what it is you're supposed to do, but you're not supposed to tune into that soft part of yourself that is vulnerable. And this is among young people now. So when I hear that repeated in my therapy room, I do challenge that. Because it's a direct link to sexuality. Mm-hmm. Why is that so? So then the assumption would be that all gay men feel all their feelings.
Yeah. Which
is not true. That cannot possibly be true. So we still can't allow men to just be. If they have their feelings, they're not real men. Yet we want them to be real men. And on their wedding days, we want to see vulnerability and softness and love. And it's so confusing. Oh my God.
It is confusing. Maybe I don't know. I think, as I can only speak for myself, but I think maybe the way I was brought up, maybe I expected, sounds awful, too much from a man, too much from men. Maybe now, as you're talking about it so clearly, so black and white, Amit, I think a lot of women that I know I've spoken to in my lifetime, that they think, they're thinking that men are thinking what men are not thinking. That makes sense. And they're getting twisted up in knots. And I always tell the young women, sixth formers I work with, if you want to know an answer to a question, just ask him. Do not expect him to suddenly be sitting at home thinking in bed about what you may be thinking.
Right.
This is not going to work. But I think as women, as much as you were talking about men and the way that, boys grow up and what they learn, I think I know when I went to school, I kind of thought that men were meant to be maybe more flexible in their thinking than they are. They're probably not at home thinking and procrastinating and thinking about, shall I approach her this way or that way? And what will she think of me if I say that or this? I don't think.
No, Sarah, they're home thinking what's the starting 11 on the weekend.
Exactly. Yeah, it's true though. Or who's playing football tonight and stuff. What am I going to eat for dinner? It's that, isn't it? It's not sitting there procrastinating and wringing their hands about how they're going to make their partner feel if they approach it in two different ways. No.
So we add mind reading to their capabilities, their competency. Yeah. We have added that. They should be able to read minds as well.
That's right,
they should know how we're feeling.
That's right. They should know.
Except they're not allowed their range of feelings, but they should somehow know and be familiar with ours.
That's right. They should be familiar with ours and know exactly how we're feeling and how to approach us in different ways to make us feel good.
Right.
Well, that's quite the burden, isn't it?
Yes.
What? There goes my penis envy, which I have had since I was 10. I would rather be female than have to go through those hoops because it's such a minefield. Do you know what? Just for lockdown, I remember talking to my son about suicide rates. Because a couple of people he knew loosely, they're not friends, but loosely knew committed suicide. And I said to him, what is it about an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, a 20-year-old that brings them to this point without being able to say to their friends they're kicking a ball with every week, I'm struggling. So they're doing the social things you mentioned, Amit, the group things. And they would say, we never saw it coming. We had no idea. And I said, so if one of those young men had come to you and say, I'm having really, really difficult time and I'm thinking I want to end my life, he goes, that wouldn't happen. The minute they got to the point that it's difficult, it'll be, let's go down to the pub, let's have a few drinks, get that in you. And if that doesn't work, snort something up your nose. Anything but talking about what was going on. And I said to him, so you're telling me 84 young men a week are committing suicide, that men would prefer to die than talk about their feelings? And he said, yeah, didn't even blink. Yeah, they would.
Well, I'm not sure that they would prefer to die, but it's just, like you say, the idea of opening up or talking or admitting that there is something to talk about is so alien to, that traditional masculine way of seeing the world and dealing with problems, that it's only going to go one way. You're right. If boys do open up, then it's always externalized. It's always, get this down you. Let's go out. Let's have a laugh. Let's do something naughty. Or let's bury our head in the thing that we like to do, whether it's football, video games. Women. Yeah. But it's always external, and going into your feelings means looking within.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've never been taught how to do that, or to read what you find when you try to do that, I think a lot of boys try, but they don't speak the language of the emotion. So they just feel a confusing, horrible mass of feelings. And then we say to them, you must talk about it. And, my question is, how are they going to do that? And what about the other lads who are listening? Often, they don't know how to speak the language of their feelings. All of a sudden, somebody starts emoting.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh my God, what am I going to do with this? Anything but sit in the room and talk about this,
Yeah.
Very true. Very true. I have a young man I work with. He's 15, and he'll come and knock on the door when none of his friends are looking, and he'll ask for a session, and he'll sit with me and kind of not know what to do with himself, and then say he wants to talk about how he feels. He feels so awful, but he doesn't know how he feels. It's it's one of those kind of things. And then about 10 minutes before the session ends, the floodgates will open. And then he'll ask for another session. I'll book him in and he won't turn up, and then he'll come back and kind of look around the door when no one's looking again. It just goes on and on like this, and he comes in, but he knows, like you said, he wants to talk, but I don't think he really knows how to. But he keeps showing up wanting to do something. And I mean, I've got all different ways, as we all have, of communicating with these young people. And you could roll out every single kind of option for this young man, but he just sits with it all around him, just still not knowing what he wants to talk about, but yet he does want to talk.
Yeah.
So that's a bit like what you said, Amit. I think in his mind he wants to talk because he's at times he's wanted to take his life, but he comes in, he's in the room, he's wanting the session, he's knocking on my door himself,
right,
but no one's looking, but yet he struggles so hard to talk about what he wants to talk about.
Yeah.
So I think that's an example of what you just said.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when I have been in front of male clients, as a therapist, it's often been reasonably straightforward trying to figure out, what the issue is and where it's coming from. And that's not me saying, I'm this amazing therapist, but that's me saying there's such a level of inarticulacy or not being able to really figure out where one's true feelings lie. And that's sounding a bit abstract. I saw a male client. He was a student from a West African background, and I think he was here on a scholarship, or his parents were paying for universities. It was very, very expensive. And he sort of came to sessions and he said, look, I'm not studying. I've just got this problem. I can't stop masturbating when I'm supposed to be going to lectures, but I just stay in my dorm room and I just want to do that. And it would have been easy to get sucked into a thing about, masturbation, sex addiction, and just to deal with it on that surface level. But with male clients, it's a displacement, and you can often, the thing that's going on is often a red herring.
Yeah.
And I'm just talking to him for a session, I figured out that he didn't want to be doing that course. It's not something that suited him.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that, his father wanted him to be doing. It wasn't for him. He was doing it to please his parents. And so his masturbation was a displacement activity, a way of avoiding his feelings.
Yeah.
Because it would be painful to confront those feelings that, I got to tell my dad, I don't want to do this, and he's going to be mad at me. And, I've got to lose a year or two out of my life, maybe go back to Africa, whatever. And so, he was finding that coping mechanism. And I only needed to see him for a few sessions, because once I got to that point and said, look, this is what I think is going on. I think you're not dealing with the fact that you're not doing what you want to do. You're not where you want to be. And you need to go back and kind of face the music with your family. And thanks very much, Doc. You're great. See you, bye. And it sort of, dusted my hands of that one. That was easy.
That's really interesting. And that must be is that kind of thing quite common for a lot of kind of men that don't follow their true purpose? That makes sense, Amit. Do you find that kind of distraction behaviors, the masturbation, say the obsessive football watching,
Well, I just think that maybe a female student would sort of be like, well, I know I'm doing this and it's not really what I want to do. And she would come to therapy and be like, well, I know it's not what I want to do, but I'm doing it to make my parents happy. And that's what talking therapy is, to be able to talk about your feelings. Yeah. But this male client, he wasn't even there. I had to interpret his behavior and interpret his feelings back to him, and then advise him that he was going to have to go through something that was going to be a bit painful, but ultimately was less painful than carrying on and, making it worse and finishing a degree that he didn't want to do, starting a life he didn't want to start. I just told him it's going to get worse. You're going to stop it now. It's painful, but it'll be more painful next week. It'll be more painful next year. And, once he got hold of that, he was able to, that was it.
That is such a good example of how young men can grow up not knowing even their own desires. We know masturbation it's self-soothing, it's regulatory, it's rhythmic. So there's something quite soothing about, we see that presentation in children sometimes when they're not able to regulate themselves. And we don't think, well, that's about sex, because it isn't. It is a self-soothing mechanism that you were able to identify. It's not that he was oversexed or highly sexed. It was an emotional distress he was in. I think that's why I'm retraining as a child and adolescent psychotherapist, because I want to work from the source rather than 10, 15 years down the road when you have a client in the room and they've developed with ideas about what makes them a man or male, and teach them their emotions. So Sarah, you talked about the engagement of a young person who really wants to, but he gets there and he doesn't know how to. And that's where play is so beautiful, because through play, you can transfer all those confused feelings onto an object, and the object can help you to figure it out, without using words. 55% of our communication is nonverbal. So words are not really necessary to explore your internal world, but they wouldn't know that.
Definitely.
We would know that as therapists, but they wouldn't know that.
Through play is so important. I mean, he did use this Play-Doh and stuff I had in the room. He was always constantly with this Play-Doh. But yeah, he just sat there looking like like kids when they first start school when the blazer's too big for them and the shoes are too big. I felt like he was shrinking into a little boy in the room.
Oh,
he probably was. But yeah, play is so important. And I think, I don't know, I just think more young men should kind of have an option of using that within their therapy sessions, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. The creative media is the safest way. Definitely. Because it doesn't feel so much about me as a person. I was thinking, I'm doing a training now. There are no men in my cohort. I did a weekend training last weekend. It was about 20 of us, no men. In fact, there were no men in the building. There were 3 different sets of training going on. And apart from the trainer, there were no men. So it's good that many women are training to be therapists and psychotherapists, but I wonder how we reach the demographic that I am so concerned about, we are so concerned about, who can go from, like I said in the last episode, I'm okay, to I'm so not okay that I'm either sectioned or I've taken my life. It's like there is literally no middle ground. For a lot of men, the suicide rates are worrying. They're going to get more worrying with the cost of living crisis, because you talked about the competency. So one of the main things a man is supposed to do is provide for his family. How will it be for a man to not be able to feed his family this winter or heat their home? I worry about what's going to escalate in terms of mental health. Whereas, like you said, women can get together and talk about it, even if they don't go formally to therapy. We do get together and talk about it. So how do we reach men? Any ideas?
And when you say reach men, do you mean to enter mental health professions, because you were talking about your experience in training, or reach men, as clients, or in order to support them? Both
and yeah.
Well, I think the two are inextricably linked. That's why I too was the only man who graduated in my cohort when we went through. That's not to say that I was the only man who entered the training, but I think I was one of 3 or 4, but the others kind of dropped out for one reason or another, and I was the only one, in that end stretch. And I think if we can get, podcasts like this, or just more male voices in this space to say, this is something that you can do, and you can reach, other men too, because I think as we were talking before, that there is always going to be that dynamic that when a man goes to therapy, he's going to feel like he's really, really making himself vulnerable. And if he can get in front of a male therapist, I think there's a parity there, because there's, the male fear is of making yourself vulnerable to a woman. And then, of course, the female therapist is not going to ridicule him for that, but it's all about perception. And, that is just too exposing a thing to do. And the other thing that strikes me about, therapy is the idea of solving problems through a relationship. That's what therapy is.
Mm-hmm.
Just at a basic level, two heads are better than one. If you've got problems, we can put our heads together and solve this problem in a relationship as a duo, rather than you just, going round and round in circles with your own thought processes. And just that idea, a relationship, if you just use that word to a man, I think that it has so many female connotations.
Yep. Yep.
That it's instantly off-putting. So the idea that you're going to go into a profession where you enter into relationships, you're like, what? That's not for me. Come on. That's going to be the response. Whereas, entering into a profession where you solve problems with your hands, you build something, a man goes, yeah, I get that. But the idea of a relationship in our culture is so associated with having a relationship, the talk or that kind of thing. And I think it's just through the culture that, that's not just what a relationship is. Like, men in their groups are having relationships, but they're just not calling it that. And if men can get comfortable with the idea that you can solve problems in a relationship, then you will get more men wanting to be therapists or mental health professionals or psychologists, and also more men who then will be comfortable going, do you know what? I'm going to speak to that guy because I'm sure he can help me figure it out, and he's been to school for this kind of thing, and I'm sure it'll be fine. I mean, I think solving problems in a relationship is a wonderful thing, but I somehow got there through quirks and accidents. I was a typical boy, with the culture being the way it is. I didn't sort of just start my life going, yeah, relationships are great and this is what I'm going to do with my life. I had to also kind of be initiated into it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. As you talked about culture, I did wonder. So I grew up in Jamaica, and I was quickly just scanning my mind for the messages that my brother, my cousins, the men around me were given about masculinity. And certainly feelings was not among them at all. Relationships sounded terrifying to them. Even a one-on-one, a monogamous relationship feels terrifying. Never mind a relationship with a therapist that you're not, or a woman that is not romantic or sexual. It's a healing relationship. I don't know that they would necessarily get that idea. You'd be dealing with the erotic transference from the offset and maybe all the way through. But yeah, those messages were definitely perpetuated culturally Men provide. Men will fight for you. They'll even kill for you. Men are in charge. It's a very patriarchal society. Men have the power, hence my penis envy, because I wanted power. And but they had to be stoic. They wouldn't cry at funerals. The women will be screaming and renting their clothes and expressing their grief, but the men would just be frozen. Almost, like there's nothing. So I feel like there's a generation that has been lost to that ideology. I'm wondering, for you culturally, did you receive any messages growing up about what it meant to be a man? And if you're willing to share them, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No. I don't think that anything was explicit. I think it was, study hard, do well at school, find a stable, respectable profession. But at the same time, I don't think anyone expected me to choose this either.
Right.
So the messages for men, it's all, do something that you get you approval, not be, do something that really speaks to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea then about going forward? Because I think about this a lot. Like, I'm a mother to a son, and I hope I have raised him to unlearn those messages about what he ought to be rather than who he is in all his divine, magnificent form. But that was very conscious. I didn't go for the whole boys don't cry or don't shout. I didn't raise him like that.
Yeah.
So I think a lot about what messages our young people are getting. My son is now 23. So, that's over for me. I wonder if, or how, not the if, how we can begin to unlearn the idea that men can't have their emotions and that they can't feel them in the same way a woman can.
Going back to the idea that you can learn through relationships, I think that's something that just our culture doesn't allow men to do. And if you think about other cultures historically or around the world, there is the idea of a mentor.
Right.
And, an older man who, whether it was kind of, Sparta, Greece, or, ancient Japan, or even cultures around the world in different countries now, this idea that a mentor, you have a relationship with this man and he will help you to develop the way that you see the world and will help you to grow as a man. That concept has gone, and therapy doesn't feel like it's equivalent for a man. It's not like you're going to go into therapy and find a mentor figure who's going to help you to grow and overcome, your challenges. It doesn't speak to the male psyche like a mentor in a warrior culture might have spoken to young boys. And we don't have those relationships between older men and younger men. And even as I'm saying that, if there was that kind of relationship in our culture, it would be a bit suspect of what's going on, And so that something about men being able to relate to each other is lost. And I think, our discussion also hasn't touched on what happens to men in the family unit as well.
Right.
And, once you get married, once you maybe have a child and settle down, and you're working a stable job and you're paying the mortgage, for men, the number of male friendships shrinks down to almost nothing. And just the male contact outside of your family bubble just shrinks down to nothing. So, or it can be very, very small, or you see your friends like once in a blue moon. Whereas women still, even within the family structure, have access to their friendships.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I think, again, it comes back to relationships. Men are cut off at the source from so many rich relationships with other men, with each other, and therefore the value of that is lost. And so we've created this idea of, therapists and professionals, but it doesn't, I don't think it's not I don't think it is a like for like. And I don't think that the therapy establishment speaks to men in that way as, that wise kind of elder figure, or the established statesman, or the proven warrior. That speaks to men through sports or through politics, but in a very abstract way. You don't relate to these guys. You want to be like them, but you relate to them in from afar, but you don't have relationships with different men of different generations in that way. And I think men are just culturally more isolated from each other.
You're right. I hadn't even considered the family man and what that means. Yeah. Wow. Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just basically taking everything you said in, Amit. I'm say lost for words, but I've got a lot of thinking to do about what you've shared tonight. Some really, really interesting points. And I'm hoping it can kind of give some food for thought to our listeners as well, because I've definitely learnt quite a bit from you tonight. Yeah, it's been really interesting. I'm just aware. God, I sound like yeah. I am aware as a therapist.
I'm also aware.
We're all aware that Karen has just managed to join us.
Hi, Karen.
Karen, hello. Hello, Karen. Would you like to ask Amit anything, or any kind of thoughts you had or questions about male mental health? We might have asked it already. I don't know.
I was just really interested to hear him talk about the family man, really, and how men seem to be cut off from other men. I just thought that was quite interesting. It's making me think about the men in my family and how I think that they present and how these issues might affect them. I guess I was thinking, I'm thinking about my own ex-husband and how he was definitely cut off, I think, from his immediate family because he'd come from another country. And that was very impactful for him, I think, just not having his family around, and he was in unfamiliar settings. I think I've mentioned this before. And for him, definitely, I think he did struggle. So yeah, I'm just kind of processing what Amit's just said and kind of relating to that, really. And I don't know, obviously I've missed what you guys have already covered. I don't want to go over it again. So I'm just wondering, had you discussed different types of men? Because Kay mentioned that Amit was talking about family men. Were there other situations you focused on?
I think we've covered quite a bit. Yeah. So family men was something that we hadn't touched on. We talked about young men or men coming into therapy or not, and a few kind of examples just from my clinical work. But just the ordinary white collar family man. The male experience is that after the age of sort of 30, you can count your friends on one hand if you're lucky. And
do you think that's in all cultures as well? Would you say that was that particularly cultural to particular ethnic groups, or would you say it was across the board? Or
I think it's got to do with living in the UK, living in a Western culture, in having a nuclear family, not living in a multi-generational household. Of course, there are cultures within the UK that do live in that way, that have extended families, but generally speaking, it's a nuclear family culture. And what seems to happen to my eyes is that a man grows up, and that means you settle down, you have some kids, you find a respectable job, and you bury yourself in that. It takes up your time, and so what always goes is your male friendships. And some people let it go, some people try and maintain it, but it's just hard with the demands of work and family, and the weekend, and what you're trying to do. That just having that bonding experience, what would have been the hunting party where a bunch of men just went off for a week and went to look for some meat to bring back to the tribe, that doesn't happen here, because just of a modern economy and a way of living. But that unfortunately cuts men off from something that they're wired to do.
That's really interesting, because I remember growing up and thinking about my dad. He very much brought his culture to this country. So he did have a group of friends, and he maintained that. And I don't know if Kay can relate to this. My dad used to go and play dominoes at the local Caribbean club, the reggae club. And he very much kept that link with his friends. So I don't think that was his experience. He did have a lot of male friends around him. He had designated leisure time, much to my mother's disappointment, where he'd be out drinking and hang out with his mates. But I do think for my dad, perhaps it was a generational thing. I'm not sure.
My dad has always had friendships.
Yeah, and whether he discussed his, intimate sort of worries or, his emotional state with anyone is questionable. I don't know about that, but he definitely had male friendships. So I think for him that was slightly different. What were you going to say, Kay?
No, I was just saying culturally, I do think that's cultural. Jamaican culture is very much you go and you do your man things, and the women aren't necessarily a part of it. So my ex-husband, for instance, he's British, second generation, I suppose. He had no friends. I was horrified, because I don't think that's healthy. Have friends. And I'm noticing with my son's group already, the friendships are drifting off, and they're not married. It's just some of them have started a family, they're dads, they're working, they're feeling the pressure of that. And their direction's already going different. So early 20s already, I can see that's happening, especially those who have become fathers quite young. He just doesn't see them.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's where it starts. The 20s, when people start getting into long-term relationships, getting married, having kids. Yeah. And we don't go to work in the same way that we might have done a few hundred years ago. We're on a family farm or in a family business, perhaps working with uncles and grandparents or cousins or other men. We go to our individual atomized jobs, and then we come home to our families, and on the weekends we've got chores or some a bit of leisure time, but again that's with the family. So just modern life, I think, is the cause here.
Sure, that makes sense, absolutely. And finding time as well, I guess. Just making that time can be quite difficult.
Especially if you're a homeowner and you need to do all the repairs on weekend and build a shed.
Yeah, it's true.
And do all the competency things you mentioned, Amit. If you've got to do the manly competency things on the weekend, I suppose that does not leave you much time to socialize with your peers.
Sure. Do you think it might be a class thing as well? Dare I throw that word in? And the reason why I say that is because I'm thinking about, I don't know, the British pub culture. So there are, people who go to the pub and men who gather in the pub. And it's a regular occurrence. I had a friend, she was English, and her complaint was, her husband never came home in time for Sunday lunch. So she'd make Sunday lunch and he was down the pub with his mates. So I'm thinking about, pockets of men or groups of people who still find the time to do that. And I guess, I completely understand what Amit's saying, that the way that we live doesn't really encourage that. But I think, I don't know, there seem to be some social groups that manage to do that.
I'm wondering if that's, the last vestiges of working class culture, because I think that's where it comes from, working men's clubs, or just being in the pub all day, and that very old school kind of idea that he was in the pub all day and then he came home and the dinner was burnt and kids were already in bed, and those working men's groups were started because men working in mines or sort of shipbuilding or heavy industry, doing the graft all day, working sort of blue collar guys, they'd be so busy grafting that they didn't actually socialize at work. They were just toiling. And so these clubs or the pub culture was set up so that they could actually have some space for themselves, and the family got pushed to the bottom of the totem pole in terms of priority. But that's kind of a very old school mentality, as you say, and maybe it's the last of a dying breed of working class British culture. Certainly, the younger generations or more white collar working people, those spaces either don't exist or they're not used in that same way, or younger men would be horrified at the thought of not putting in quality time with their family, not seeing the kids, not spending time with their wives or with their partners.
I agree. I think there has been a slight shift for a lot of people. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, it's interesting.
So I think we've taken a good hour of Amit's time, maybe more. So we are going to wrap up, Amit. Thank you for being with us. It has been such a delight to talk to you.
It has. Thank you, Amit.
I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you, guys.
It was lovely to meet you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll put your book details in the bio and it will be on our YouTube channel as well. So readers who want to buy your book or to source your services, they can find you.
Yeah, Meditation for Weight Loss. you know, it's on Audible as well as Kindle for Amazon. Anyone who's sort of been struggling with diets and weight loss and all of that stuff, and I just wanted people to try a different approach, which is to find a relationship with their bodies and a relationship with food. And there's that scary word again, but this one applies to women and men in that we're all guilty of externalizing it and making it all about what the scales say or what I've eaten. But we have a relationship with our bodies and a relationship with the food that we eat, and often that side of things is neglected. So that's where the book is coming from. It's quite punchy. I didn't want to, put anyone to sleep, but it's just introduced a few concepts that might turn things upside down for a few people.
I'm going to get your book because I have a love-hate. No, I have a love-love relationship with food, let me be honest. It's all love.
It made me think as you were saying that, Amit, and talking about your book. And as I've got older, my relationship with food has definitely changed, because now I'm not necessarily intolerant to things, but there are things that just don't make me feel good, right?
Yeah, same here.
And before I would eat it and suffer. Now I'm like, actually, why would you want to make yourself feel bad? Okay, it's a few moments of pleasure, but actually it's hours or days where you feel really uncomfortable. So my relationship with food has changed so much, and I tend to eat a lot more plant-based foods now, and I feel better for it. And the better I feel, the more I want to eat like that. So I think you're absolutely right. You do have to have a look at your relationship with food, your relationship with body, and the better I feel, and the better my relationship is with my body, the better I want to eat, because I want to maintain that. So I completely, wholeheartedly agree with what you've said, and I can't wait to read your book.
Yeah.
And I realised I've just launched into a different subject, but maybe this is a whole other podcast. So I'll leave it there.
I'd love another podcast, Amit, to talk about food, because I am working on it in therapy as we speak. And a part of me absolutely does not want to change anything, and a part of me does. So yeah, it does sound like another podcast. Hope we can book you again to come back on.
Yeah, anytime. I'd love to do this again with you guys.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Take good care.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Beautifully.